Hello and welcome to the Ghosts and Folklore podcast. I'm Mark Rees, and on each episode, I investigate a different, weird, and wonderful subject. And on this episode, this special Halloween episode, we are going to play some ghostly games. Or more specifically, we are going to look at the folklore surrounding some traditional Halloween games. Games that were sometimes fun, but sometimes fatal. Always the best kind of games, sometimes fun and sometimes fatal. And so, to begin at the beginning. And in Wales, Halloween is known as Nos Calan Gaeaf. Nos is night and Calan Gaeaf is the first day of winter. So October the 31st is the night before the first day of winter, when the veil between our world and the other world is at its thinnest. It's also an ysbryd nos. Ysbryd nos, which means spirit night, and all manner of ghosts and goblins might be abroad and might be encountered. Now, when it comes to folklore, the folklorist Peter Roberts, writing in the early 1800s, so we're going back a couple of centuries for this one, compared the entertainments in Wales on All Hallows Eve to those happily described in the poem Halloween by the Scottish poet Robert Burns. So, the entertainments in Wales were very much like those in Scotland, or at least those described by Scotland's greatest, or arguably greatest poet, Robert Burns. Although the folklorist does assume we are all familiar with this poem, and while I am sure all of my listeners know this poem off by heart, just in case you don't, just in case it slipped your mind, it's quite a long one, so I'm not going to read out the entire thing, but just so you've got a rough idea, Burns does talk about things like bobbing for apples, which of course will be familiar to many people today, things like burning nuts as an act of divination, and we are told by a contemporary source that Burns thought Halloween was, to quote, the night when witches, devils, and other mischief-making beings are all abroad on their baneful midnight errands. So in Burns's imagination, Halloween really was a time for the darker side of life. Halloween, yes, it's a time for playing games, but it's also a time for witches, devils, and other mischief-making beings. And just to put my usual disclaimer in, whenever I mention witches, I am, of course, talking about witches as they were assumed to be in the 18th and the 19th centuries. I'm not talking about modern-day witchcraft and modern-day witches, who are, of course, lovely, lovely people, although I'm sure a few of them will also be causing a little mischief on Halloween. But back to our folklorist who tells us that few, if any, of the events described in Burns's poem were unknown in Wales. So, there was apple bobbing and nut burning and witches and devils. And if you really want the whole comprehensive list, I will post the entire poem on my Facebook page the day this episode is published. But the general object, we are told, the whole point of all of this, besides the promotion of mirth, appears to have been to learn the fate of individuals in the following year. So what he's telling us is that these games were more than just ordinary games. Yes, it was fun, they were a source of mirth, as he says, but they had a deeper meaning, because these games could reveal the secrets of the future. Yes, the secrets of the future, which were primarily about marriage, life, and of course, death. And you could predict such things, we are told, by the omens or apparitions of this oracular night. So we are being told to watch out for omens and apparitions that might appear on Halloween, because they can offer some clues as to how your life might go. So you might have some good news, like who you're going to marry, depending on your thoughts about marriage, I guess, and you might have some less nice news, like when the Grim Reaper might be knocking at your door. And the reason Halloween was so good for this, according to our folklorist, I should stress these are not my views, these are the views of our 19th century folklorist, but he says that November the 1st was thought of as the winter solstice, so the start of a new year. Therefore, people naturally thought the night before, October the 31st, Halloween, Nos Calan Gaeaf, was a magical time. And those with, inverted commas here, simple and superstitious minds, again, not my words, but the words of the folklorist, but those with simple and superstitious minds might be tricked by such games. So, reading between the lines, what our folklorist is saying is that while people believed these games could predict the future, the people who believed in such things were, to quote, simple and superstitious. However, just because he did not believe in these games, that did not mean they couldn't be fatal. They could still kill you because of the fear that was caused. He says the fear these games caused was very real, adding, as you will soon find out in the examples that are coming up, which applies just as much to this podcast today as it did to that folklore book 200 years ago, as you will discover on the examples coming up soon. But just to recap that quickly, what he's effectively saying is that it's a bit like if you think a house is haunted, it doesn't really matter if the house is haunted or not. It still has the same effect on you. If you spend all night lying awake, worrying about it, unable to sleep with the lights on, and then you spend all day sleeping and not going to work instead, regardless of if the house is haunted or not, it might as well be because you're acting like it is. And he's saying these games have the same effects. Whether or not they're true or not doesn't matter. The effect is the same. If somebody performs one of these games and as a result thinks they're going to die within a week, the fear it causes could be, to use his words, fatal to the person who believes it. Never mind a week, they might not have a day as a result, as you will discover on the examples coming up. And the first game we're going to look at, although I don't think game is the right word here, this is more of an ordeal really, but the first game we're going to look at is one that was mentioned by Burns in his poem, and it's also one our Welsh folklorist tells us took place in Wales, and that is to go and sow hemp seed in a churchyard a little before 12 at night. So you go and sow, and this is SOW sowing, not stitching things with a needle, but scattering seeds. You go and you scatter hemp seeds in a churchyard, tiptoeing among the graves. Well, he doesn't specify that, but of course you're free to do so. Tiptoeing among the graves, dropping your seeds a little before 12 at night, just before the witching hour. And the specific instructions go like this. The person, that would be you, goes around the church repeating these words. Hemp I sow, let him or her that comes after me mow. Now, of course, you can change the him or her bit depending on your preference of future partner. Hemp I sow, let him or her that comes after me mow. And that final word mow, I assumed was a typo when I first read it, come after me now. But that really is mow. This is tying into the whole reaping, cutting. This is harvest season, like mowing grass. So that one last time, just in case you want to jot this down. Hemp I sow, let him or her that comes after me mow. Now, after which, and remember it's important you do this just before midnight, because after which, as the church clock strikes the last stroke of 12, the sower, and that's you of course, unless you've found some other unfortunate victim, but the sower looks back behind them, and they never fail to see one of two things, either a coffin or their future partner in wedlock. Now, I think we can assume the coffin is not going to be good news. I don't need to go into the iconography of a coffin. If you see the coffin, that's going to be bad. But the appearance of a partner is said to be frequently the appearance of a person never seen before. So this vision that you'll see of your future partner is more than likely going to be someone you don't recognize. So if you were hoping that it was somebody that you fancied appearing there, or maybe even someone that you're already with, it's bad news. It's probably going to be a stranger. However, when you do see them afterwards, they will be immediately recognized. So it's almost like you're walking down the street a month or two later and then bang, somebody in the crowd will stand out and you'll think, that is the mysterious stranger I am going to marry. That is the person I encountered in ghostly form while I was dancing around the graveyard at midnight. Well, not necessarily dancing. I mean, it doesn't say you can't dance, but it's the sowing the seeds is the important bit. Dancing is optional. And in a final, rather dark, suitably gothic footnote to this. We are told by our folklorist that people were sometimes so frightened by what they saw when they were alone at such an hour in such a spooky place that they went into hysterics, and in some case it wasn't just madness, it was said to have ended in death. So the experience was so intense it drove them into hysterics, which led to death in some cases. And while he doesn't specify which outcome resulted in this, whether it was the coffin or whether it was seeing their future spouse, but either way, it does suggest that trying to look into the future might have some serious consequences, and that is certainly what our folklorist thinks, who will make his views clear in the next game, which, just to warn you, can be just as fatal as the first. They are both as dangerous as each other. And our next game involves people who would listen at the great church door, hoping to hear the names of those who would die in the coming year. Which is quite a sentence. There's a lot packed in there, and I will unpack that in a moment. But this is something I have spoken about on previous Halloween episodes over the years. But it's this game, for want of a better word, game of listening at the great church door, hoping to hear the names of those who would die in the coming year. Because it was said, if you listened at that door, those poor souls in the parish who would not be seeing another Halloween would have their names read aloud in this grim roll call of those doomed to die within the next 12 months. And you can probably already spot the potential danger in this, but we are told that if you thought your name was one of the first to be read out, the shock could be dreadful. So if you thought you heard your name being read out early on that list, the shock alone could be enough to finish you off. And the interesting word there is the word thought. Because the folklorist isn't saying if your name is read out. The folklorist is saying if you thought your name was read out, the shock alone could be fatal. And this is where our level-headed folklorist gives us his take on what's happening. And talk about skeptical. People moan about how skeptical everyone is nowadays and how back in the good old days people were much more open to these things. Well, this folklorist is straight out of the Enlightenment. And he tells us that, in this case, as with the last example, as with sowing seeds, this is an example of people's weakness being taken advantage of. Those simple, superstitious people he spoke of earlier, this is their weakness being taken advantage of. And while sometimes it is just their imagination playing tricks on them, in which case it's nobody's fault but their own, they put themselves in these situations and their imagination plays tricks on them. However, and this is where things get very sinister, sometimes it's because their neighbours are playing tricks on them. And this could have fatal, to quote, fatal consequences. And he tells us that, although the folly was theirs, although it was their fault, since it's not very innocent to try and uncover what God has chosen to keep hidden. So, just to interrupt quickly, just to clarify that, but what he's saying is that if you are stupid enough to try and defy God's orders and look into the future to see what you should not be seeing, then it's your own fault. But he says it was far worse and quite wicked for others to risk terrifying them with consequences that could be fatal. Because what would happen, hypothetically, if somebody told their neighbour they were going to the church to try this out? They could sneak up to the church beforehand, hide behind that door, and read out their names to ensure this simple, superstitious person does hear their name first, and as a result they, if not necessarily die of fright, but are certainly taken very ill as a result. Then that, we are told, is far more wicked than the person who goes there in the first place, believing such things. Although he does add, thankfully, these practices have now almost, if not entirely, died out in Wales. So in the 1800s or the early 1800s, these practices have now almost, if not entirely, died out in Wales. And I've got some bad news for our folklorist, because certainly at the end of the 19th century, other folklorists were still talking about such traditions, and who knows, maybe such things are still active today in some darkened corner of Wales or Scotland or anywhere else in the world that might have practiced such things, and if not, maybe you are the ideal person to revive such things. I mean, all you need is a local church to walk around, preferably one of the smaller churches. You don't want to be there all night walking around a gigantic church. Get some hemp seeds and let me know how you get on. And if you do get arrested for dancing among the gravestones, scattering seeds at midnight on Halloween, I will deny all responsibility. Now, finally, to wrap up this episode, if you are sitting there thinking, this is all well and good, but I prefer a Halloween night indoors. I don't want to be freezing my toes off outside, tempting fate, potentially with fatal consequences. I want to stay inside where it's nice and warm. Thank you very much. Well, we are told that by the end of the 19th century, when the people were tired at the end of the night, they congregated around the old hearth and became attentive and sometimes scared listeners while the aged grandfather or grandmother related fairy tales and ghost tales in the fireglow. Meanwhile, in secret and silence, uncanny tricks were attempted. And I love the image that conjures, that mixture of traditional yet spooky, naughty but nice trick or treat, because even centuries ago, we had this wholesome family huddled together around the hearth, there for the heat and the light. Yet the stories being told, the stories the aged grandparents were telling were those, sometimes scary ones, of ghosts and fairies and things that go bump in the night. And that little bit at the end, which to repeat quickly was, meanwhile, in secret and silence, uncanny tricks were attempted. And you can just imagine maybe the older people, the teenagers maybe, sneaking off to another room, maybe upstairs, to attempt those uncanny tricks they needed a little bit more privacy for. And what might they summon with these uncanny tricks? What might they discover about the future with these uncanny tricks? And might they also be fatal? Well, I hate to leave you with a cliffhanger, but we are nearing the end of this episode of the Ghosts and Folklore podcast, and we have reached the end of this particular folkloric account. And while that might be a little bit of a trick ending, I do also have a treat for you, because the next episode is another Halloween special. And for more of those uncanny revelations, be sure to tune in on Halloween Eve. The next episode will be released on October the 30th. And as I say at the end of every episode, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so now, because then you'll never miss an episode ever, including the next Halloween special. And if you're a new listener, I have recorded many Halloween episodes over the years. Please go back and rummage through the archives. Who knows what you might find there. Also, I've got something extra special to announce this Halloween. As you may or may not know, if you follow me on social media, or if you listen to this podcast on YouTube, a quick shout out to everyone who is listening on YouTube, then you might well know this already. But I've been working on a very exciting documentary series, and I hope to tell you more about where you can watch that soon, wherever you are in the world. But in the meantime, we've started releasing some teasers, some trailers, some behind-the-scenes footage, some interviews, etc., which you can see on YouTube, on Instagram, on various other social media platforms. And it's called Paranormal Unpacked. Nice and easy to remember. Paranormal Unpacked. Just search for that in all the usual places, and you will find a teaser trailer we've put together, which is technically it's the introduction to the show, and you'll also find some interviews and a very fun Halloween episode we're just wrapping up, which might be there by the time you hear this episode. So, and when I say we, I should explain this is not just me. I'm working with my very good friend and co-presenter, Steve Balsamo, and behind the scenes, the guys who do the real hard work is Ant Jones leading this, and we've just been joined by Al, who's making it sound fantastic as well. So that is my Halloween present to you. Go out there and have a quick search for Paranormal Unpacked. Otherwise, if you are lucky enough to be in Wales, I have lots and lots of Halloween talks coming up this October. We're certainly in double figures. There's more than 10 of them out there. So if you do follow me on social media, you can check all the dates. If you aren't lucky enough to live in Wales, of course, there is still the podcast and that aforementioned Halloween special coming up very soon. And of course, there's the books. I've written plenty of spooky books, which are available from all the usual good bookshops offline and on, but I think that's enough shameless self-promotion for the end of one episode. So let's wrap things up, and on that note, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. Diolch yn fawr iawn am wrando. I've been Mark Rees. This has been my Ghosts and Folklore podcast, beaming to you from Wales to the world. And remember, the next time you're walking, maybe dancing around a graveyard at night, and an eerie, spine-chilling apparition manifests behind you, fear not. It's just your future spouse come to wish you a happy Halloween. Nos Calan Gaeaf happis. Until next time, Nos ta.